I had everything a man my age could ask for. At 42, I was a structural engineer with 17 years at the same firm, a four-bedroom house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, a retirement account I'd been feeding since I was 26, and a marriage that my colleagues openly envied. My wife and I had been together for 11 years, married for 8. We had a son named Caleb who had just turned 9 and loved baseball, and building Lego sets on Sunday mornings. Life wasn't perfect, but it was solid. It was real. It was mine. Then one Saturday in October, I found a document I wasn't supposed to find, and everything I thought was real turned out to be a story someone else had been writing for me. It started with a broken printer. My wife had been using my home office the night before to print something for work. I didn't think anything of it. She worked in HR at a mid-sized logistics company, so paperwork was normal. But when I went in that Saturday morning to grab a file I needed, I noticed the paper tray was jammed. I pulled it open, reached in to clear the blockage, and a single sheet came out folded in thirds, wedged against the side panel where it had slipped during the jam. I almost threw it away without looking. I don't know what made me unfold it. Maybe it was the logo in the corner, a medical laboratory I didn't recognize. Maybe it was just instinct, the kind that builds up over years of small things you file away without knowing why. It was a paternity test result. My name was on it. My son's name was on it. My son's name was on it, and the probability of paternity read 0.00%. I stood in that office for a long time. I remember the morning light coming through the blinds and laying stripes across the desk. I remember the sound of Caleb's cartoon playing downstairs, the laugh track, the cheerful music. I remember my hands not shaking, which surprised me. Everything inside me had gone completely still, the way a building goes quiet right before the structure fails. My wife's name is Diane. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party in our early 30s. She was funny and direct and knew exactly what she wanted from life. I admired that about her. I still do, in a way that has nothing to do with forgiveness. I folded the paper back along its original creases and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I walked downstairs, made coffee, and watched my son eat cereal at the kitchen table. He had a smear of milk on his chin. He was arguing with the television about whether a certain superhero could beat another superhero. He looked exactly like himself. He didn't look like me. He didn't look like anyone I knew. And I had spent 9 years telling myself that kids just look like kids. Diane came downstairs about 20 minutes later, poured herself coffee, kissed me on the cheek. She smelled like her usual shampoo. She asked if I wanted to take Caleb to the farmer's market that afternoon. I said sure. I spent the entire weekend like that, present in body, absent in every way that mattered. Watching her, watching her, watching him. Turning that piece of paper over in my mind like a stone I couldn't put down. Monday morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. I drove to a private DNA testing lab on the other side of the city, one I found by searching from my work phone with the location services turned off. I paid cash. I used a kit that required a cheek swab for me and a hair sample from Caleb, which I collected from his bathroom brush while he was at school. I told the lab I needed results in 72 hours. They said it would cost extra. I said fine. While I waited, I didn't confront Diane. I didn't search her phone or her email. I didn't hire anyone or follow her anywhere. I just lived inside those 72 hours like a man waiting for a doctor's verdict, going through the motions of dinner and bedtime stories and Tuesday morning traffic, carrying something enormous in my chest that had no name yet. The result came back Thursday. They confirmed what the first document had said. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and read the results 3 times. Then I called my brother Marcus, who lives in Nashville. Marcus is 5 years older than me and is the kind of person who has seen enough of life not to react with panic. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What do you need from me right now?" That was the right question. That was exactly the right question, and I will never forget that he asked it. I told him I needed a lawyer before I needed anything else. He said he knew someone. Her name was Patricia Holt, a family law attorney in Columbus with 20 years of experience. I met with her the following Monday morning before work. I spread both documents on her conference table, the one from the printer jam and the one I'd ordered myself. She reviewed them without expression, asked me several precise questions about the timeline of my marriage, our finances, the mortgage, Caleb's birth certificate. She explained my rights and my risks with the kind of clarity that only comes from having done something many times. "Do you know who the biological father is?" she asked. I told her I had a suspicion. His name was Derek. He had been a coworker of Diane's for years. I had met him 3 or 4 times at company events. He was friendly, the kind of friendly that doesn't cost anything. Diane had mentioned him occasionally in passing. Derek says this. Derek handled that project. I had never thought anything of it. Now I thought everything of it. Patricia told me not to confront him. Not yet. She told me to document what I could, be careful with finances, and think hard about what outcome I actually wanted. Do you want to save the marriage? She asked. I looked at the documents on her table. I want the truth, I said. All of it. She nodded like that was a complete answer, because it was. I drove home that night and sat in the driveway for 11 minutes before going inside. Diane was helping Caleb with a school project at the kitchen table. Something about the water cycle, cardboard and blue paint and cotton balls for clouds. They were laughing about something when I walked in. Diane looked up and smiled at me. The smile I had known for 11 years, and I felt something in me close like a door. I was careful. I was patient, in a way I hadn't known I was capable of. Over the following 3 weeks, while Patricia worked quietly in the background, I kept everything normal on the surface. I went to Caleb's baseball practice. I attended a work dinner with Diane. I cut the lawn on Saturday morning. I watched our life from the inside like a visitor who has already bought his return ticket. Then, 23 days after I found that document, I had enough. I sat down with Diane on a Sunday evening after Caleb had gone to bed. I put both DNA results on the coffee table between us. I didn't say anything. I just watched her face. She looked at the documents. She looked at me. And she didn't ask what they were. That told me everything. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Not because of the yelling. There was some. And not because of the crying. There was a great deal of that too. But because of the specific way the truth came out. Not all at once, which would have been cleaner, but in layers, each one worse than the one before. She admitted the affair immediately. It had lasted 14 months. It had ended, she said, about 8 months before Caleb was born, though she had suspected the timing was complicated. That was the word she used. Complicated. You knew, I said. She looked at her hands. When Caleb was born, I said, you already knew there was a possibility. I didn't know for certain, she said. But you had him tested. She didn't answer. Her silence was its own answer. And the results I found, I said, those came from a test you ordered. Yes. Why was it in the printer? Why was it in my office? She said she had been using my printer because hers was broken. She had printed it to look at it one more time before she decided what to do. She said she had been carrying the knowledge for 9 years, and it had been destroying her slowly, and she had almost told me twice, and both times she had pulled back because of Caleb, because of what it would do to our family, because she loved me, because she was terrified. I listened to all of it. I let her finish. Then I said, I need you to be completely honest with me right now. Does Derek know? She hesitated for exactly 1 second too long. Yes, she said. He's always known. I stood up. I picked up the documents. I walked upstairs, took a bag from the closet, and packed enough for a week. I came back downstairs and I looked at Diane, who was sitting on the couch with her face in her hands, and I said, I'm going to stay with Marcus for a while. I'll be in touch through my attorney. She looked up. Please don't do this, she said. Please. I thought about Caleb asleep upstairs. I thought about 9 years of Sunday mornings and baseball practices and the way he called for me when he had a nightmare. I thought about a paper tray that had jammed at exactly the wrong moment. Or exactly the right one. I'll always be here for Caleb, I said. But I can't be here for this. I left. Marcus drove up from Nashville the next morning. I don't know what I would have done without him. Not in a dramatic sense. I was never in danger of doing anything reckless, but in the simpler sense that grief requires a witness, and he was willing to be mine. He sat with me through the worst of it. The first week of sleepless nights, and the particular kind of silence that comes when the life you built suddenly has no floor. Through Patricia, I filed for divorce 6 weeks after I left. The process was what Patricia had prepared me for. Slow, procedural, and painful in ways you don't anticipate. Diane did not fight the divorce itself. What she fought was the parental rights arrangement. This is the part that nearly broke me. About 3 months into the proceedings, Derek filed a petition for parental rights. I don't know exactly what Diane had promised him or told him or what had passed between them in those 9 years, while I was working and paying a mortgage and coaching Little League on weekends. But suddenly, there was a man I barely knew sitting across a courtroom claiming rights to a boy I had raised since birth. Patricia had warned me this was possible. Family law in Ohio is complicated on the question of paternity. When a child has been raised by a non-biological father, the law considers what's in the best interest of the child, and in this case the child had a relationship with me. A real one. 9 years of real. The court ordered an independent paternity test, conducted by the court's own appointed lab. There was no question about the biology. Derek was Caleb's biological father. But Patricia argued something that turned out to matter enormously, that Caleb's primary attachment, his school, his home, his emotional stability, all of it was centered on me, and she argued it with records, report cards that listed me as the primary contact, medical forms in my handwriting, years of school pickup logs, photographs, coaches who testified about who showed up to every practice. Derek's attorney presented him as someone who had always intended to be involved, who had been kept away by circumstances. I sat in that courtroom, and I thought about every circumstance I could remember. Caleb's first steps, his first day of kindergarten, the time he broke his arm falling out of a tree and I spent 4 hours in the ER holding his hand while he cried. Every Christmas morning, every nightmare, every ordinary Tuesday. Derek had been present for none of it. The judge took 3 weeks to issue a ruling. During those 3 weeks, I barely slept. I went through the motions of work and eating and existing, but my entire internal life was in a courtroom waiting room. When the ruling came, I was granted primary physical custody. Derek was granted supervised visitation, to increase over time contingent on Caleb's comfort and the recommendation of a family therapist. It was not the clean, complete victory I'd wanted, but it was enough. I told Caleb the truth over several conversations, the way Patricia and a family therapist named Dr. Renee guided me to do it. Not all at once, but in age-appropriate pieces, over time, as his questions evolved. The first conversation was the hardest. He was 10 by then, old enough to sense that something had shifted in the architecture of his world, young enough that I had to find words that wouldn't shatter him. I told him that sometimes families are more complicated than they look from the outside. I told him that there was a man named Derek who was connected to him in one way, and that I was connected to him in every other way. I told him that the way I loved him had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice, that I had chosen him, and I kept choosing him every single day. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if I was going to leave. I said, "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, the way kids nod when they're filing information away for later. Then he asked if we could order pizza, because it was Friday and Friday was supposed to be pizza night and some things should stay the same. We ordered pizza. The divorce was finalized 14 months after I first walked out the door with that bag. Diane and I split the house and the assets in a way that was fair, if not warm. She was not a villain in any clean storybook sense. She was someone who had made an enormous mistake, compounded it with years of silence, and then lived inside the consequences of that silence until they became bigger than she was. I don't know that I forgave her in the way that word usually implies, but I let go, which is different and maybe more necessary. Derek faded. He attended a handful of the supervised visits in the first year. His attorney stopped filing motions. Caleb, who met him under the careful guidance of Dr. Taunters, Renee, was polite and cautious in the way children are when they're being introduced to something their instincts aren't sure about. By the time Caleb was 12, Derek's contact had become sporadic. By 13, it had stopped almost entirely. I don't know whose choice that was, or whether it was a choice at all. What I know is that Caleb is 15 now. He's taller than me by 2 inches and deeply proud of that fact. He plays varsity baseball. He still builds things, not Lego sets anymore, but actual furniture, with actual tools, in the garage on weekends. He has his mother's directness and something that might be mine, some stubbornness about getting things right. He calls me Dad, not because the law says he has to, not because it's the only word available, but because that is what I am. That is what I have always been, and whatever was written on those documents, whatever was decided in that courtroom, none of it had the authority to change that. A few months ago, Caleb asked me about everything. He's old enough now that he had pieced most of it together himself, and he wanted the full version, not the age-appropriate one. So I told him, I told him about the printer jam and the 72-hour wait and the Sunday night on the couch in the courtroom. I told him about Marcus driving up from Nashville and about Patricia and about Dr. Renee and about every morning during that 14 months when I woke up and felt the shape of what I'd lost before I remembered that I still had him. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Were you ever sorry you stayed? I mean, sorry you stayed for me?" I thought about that question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," I said. "Not for a single day." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He went back to the shelving unit he was building in the garage. Later that night, I sat on the back porch and thought about what it means to build something. Not just furniture and not just careers. The other things. The things that don't show up on any document. That no lab can measure. That no court can fully account for. The presence. The showing up. The choosing, over and over, even when it costs you. I lost a marriage. I lost years of trust I had placed in someone and a version of my life I had believed in completely. But I kept what mattered, and I would do it the same way again.